I would like to now take the opportunity to invite our two panelists. Our first panelist needs very little introduction, and as you will see through the Pigeonhole app, he has led a very distinguished public service career in the public service. If I could please call up Mr. Wasantha Deshapriya, the Secretary to the Ministry of Telecommunications and Digital Infrastructure. If I could also call upon our second panelist, who is having a rather busy afternoon. If I could ask Dias to come back up again. Dias is the Deputy Head of the Pulse Labs, Jakarta. So maybe I will just take a very quick, I'll just take a moment and maybe lay out the land a little bit in this area of open data and how it works with open government. And I think the first thing that I would point out, and I think we've heard it already, the nature of open data. There are 8 key features which are frequently spoken about. I won't list them all out now. But I think the one thing that we can see is the accessibility to data is essential. The ability to use that data freely is a key feature. And when we see public sector data which is available, the ability for that data to be out there as open government data is also essential. Now, as many of us will know from the different sectors that we're working in, the state gathers a great deal of data. Arguably, we could say that the state is a data monopolist. But how does the state use that data? And is there a vision for how that data can be accessed by the public? And at times, let's face it, sometimes the state is also quite unresponsive. And does data actually provide an opportunity for becoming more responsive to the public? These are questions to answer and for us to explore. 3 key benefits which emanate from open data, and these were things which were, this is not independent thought of my own, but 3 areas that the Open Government Partnership has identified. Firstly is in transparency. So what is government doing? Do citizens have an opportunity of tracking what government is doing? So transparency is one. Efficiency is another. And when we're speaking about efficiency, the opportunity to better coordinate even within government. So sometimes, as we well know, even through my work, we see how different, across different fields, the inability for entities with sometimes overlapping mandates to communicate with one another, that is sometimes a challenge. So better efficiency is a second point. And the third point is about innovation. And the fact that this innovation doesn't necessarily only have to be public sector innovation, it can be private sector innovation. We've heard the example of, even innovating to ensure that train times are better known by members of the public. And so there are various ways of delivering both social and commercial value through open data. If I were to very, very quickly look at some of the key milestones in Sri Lanka's recent history, I mean, I've heard the term right to information, RTI, being used a great deal through the morning sessions. Through the 19th Amendment, we constitutionally recognize the right to information. Flowing on from that, in late 2015, Sri Lanka became a member of the Open Government Partnership. Becoming a member of the Open Government Partnership, in a nutshell, what the OGP, the Open Government Partnership, is about a policy collaboration between government and civil society in delivering open government objectives surrounding transparency, accountability, public participation. And then if we look even within our open government partnership, if we look at Commitment 6 is actually tied in very closely with promoting the open data concept and delivering the benefits to citizens through ICT. So this is a cabinet-approved open government plan. One of the milestones there was that at the time that that plan was set, there were 89 data sets which were in the public domain. The commitment was that there should be 200 by the end of 2016 and 500 by July 2018. Having gone and checked yesterday, we currently have 101 data sets on our data portal, 68 of which are in the CSV format, so which, if speaking to many researchers here, we will see that the CSV format is the easiest format to use. So maybe this is something that we can explore a little further with Mr. Deshapriya as well. But even when we look at the right to information, one thing that we're also sometimes unaware of at times is that, okay, public authorities need to answer citizens' requests for data that is held by those public authorities. But importantly, within our RTI system, all public authorities in Sri Lanka also have the obligation of proactively disclosing information. And that element of RTI is one which is still not necessarily focused on a great deal, and this is a good opportunity of maybe discussing how proactive disclosure could work and what the vision is for it. But I would say that one distinction is that RTI is reactive. And when people are filing information requests. But that proactive disclosure bit is more about ensuring that open data is open by default. And that may be also requiring a bit of a change in mindset as well. But importantly, I don't think it's only for government officials to take responsibility for this. It's about journalists, civil society, interested citizens to also engage. So in that light, I will now ask Mr. Deshapriya. We will ask a few questions of our panelists, and then we will open it up for an open Q&A. But maybe my first question to Mr. Deshapriya, in light of the Open Government Partnership commitments, amongst other things, is what is your assessment of how open government has fared already in Sri Lanka? And maybe can you share some light on the vision for the open data initiative that the government is trying to take forward?
Okay, thank you. Open data was called by early 2000 as oil of the new era, and also then somebody said that it is the new raw material for the industry. So, in my opinion, we are yet to uncover oil in Sri Lanka. This has been there has been great demand and great enthusiasm in early 2012-10 period in Sri Lanka in the government, where every government organization was requested to provide at least 5 data sets, which are complying with the principles of open data. As you know, there are 8 principles which have been identified by Open Gov Data Forum. However, we collected a number of data sets, and all did not meet the requirements. So, however, some whatever meet the requirements are published. Going forward, I think the government has not yet set its real target on this activity. In my opinion, even open data, open government initiative, though we take the responsibility of open data aspects, but in my opinion, we have yet to even see the value of this great initiative. One major achievement that we could gain through open government initiative is that providing the empowering people to question the government investment on roads, the welfare, and so on. So we have a wealth of data in the government, and I would say that we could get at least more than 50% such data in electronic format. However, the failure has been to convince in the number one I see is that we have not been able to show the value of open data to public. What you could really be, what could be the real advantage to the man on the road. So that has not been there. And secondly, as you mentioned, government is when particular organizations are considered, they are very territorial when it comes to data and very possessive. So these two have been held up the progress. So I think right now with deadline in our sight, but not the sufficient amount of results to meet the targets, it is high time, I think, even SDG data.lk initiative is also should be we should take as a boom, the good platform to boost it forward. So our vision is that we need to have a minimum 2,500 data sets. That have been the original target. So now for short-term target, it should be 500 data sets which are complying with the open data principles. So that is where we want to be in next 2 years' time. We need to have, by end of 2019, we need to have 2,500 data sets. That's the updated targets.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Deshapriya. Maybe before I move on, Dias, I'm seeing a couple of questions coming in, which I think relate quite closely to what you mentioned, Mr. Deshapriya. Now, arguably, as you pointed out, people are very possessive of their data. The willingness to share data is a challenge. Now, I'm seeing two questions here about the coordination of data collection. Another question here speaking about the health ministry being possessive about data. How can we run an open data system in light of that? Is there a bureaucratic blockage? Because it almost seems, and I'm just making this term up, but it almost seems like there's this concept of ministerial sovereignty, where people don't share information to other ministries or other agencies. Is that correct? And how do we solve that problem?
Yeah, it is very true. You put the nail in the very right place. And this we have been discussing this in major forums. Public data aspects. And major departments have completely, openly denied rejected the request to share data, because we invested that, from the, when organizer point of view, we got money from the treasury, we made the plan, we invested on that, and we collected data, so this is our data. So basically, they completely disregard the fact that this is public money. That is where it all started. So in my opinion, that argument is completely invalid. And this blockade has been there, and still it continues, because there's a threat that provided that I share this data, And if it gets into wrong hands, would I be penalized? So I think that those are the areas that we need to clarify if we want to really move forward.
And so, Mr. Deshapriya, and I don't want to sound pushy, but how do we do that? Now, you have described the problem very clearly. So, what is the solution?
One way is to that government published e-government policy back in 2009, and though open data has been kicking around even at that time, it was not a part of the government policy. That's one thing that we could do. Right now, ICTA is drafting the government policy next version. And as we know that, I could remember when Barack Obama took over the presidency of the USA, he issued a directive, presidential directive, that in case you would not share the data as open data, and government would not provide funding for such building such systems, development or enhancement. That's one way. Then we need to see that every system should desanitize and anonymize all their data and provide. So if you could have that policy going into the government policy, we could ask the Treasury, please ensure that these organizations should provide open data to their systems at least at the end of the year. And secondly, each organization should be given a very specific mandate, rather than opening up the data and get something going and delivering something to their citizens. Agriculture, welfare, identity management, or whatever, communication, and all together, deliver some tangible thing out of it, rather than, this has been, one problem has been that we issue open data, but afterwards, what's it?
No.
We are not going anywhere. We are publishing open data for the sake of publishing it. Indeed. So we need to have somebody to take it over from that side and ensure that demonstrate the usability, being an advantage of open data. So, without that, I think we just publishing it for the sake of doing it, I won't rather encourage.
Indeed. Thank you. Dias, maybe I could ask you to speak a little bit about the initiative of Satu Data that you've been working on in Indonesia, but also maybe if you could also touch on a little bit about, Mr. Deshapriya spoke about just producing data sets for the sake of producing them and publishing them. How do we sort of ensure that there's sort of user-centered understanding of how data should be disseminated?
Okay, firstly, thank you, Asoka and Mr. Deshapriya. The Satu Data initiative is the government of Indonesia's initiative, and Pulse Lab Jakarta is working on a very small periphery of that. But it comes from this move towards more open, accountable government. And so some of the problems sound very familiar, Mr. Deshapriya. So the office of the Executive Office of the President and the National Planning Agency of Indonesia are spearheading this draft regulation. So it hasn't been enacted yet. It's still a draft, and it's been people are working on it. But I'd like to share a bit about the process of working on it, because I think that's quite impressive. So the problem that we're facing is very much the same. Inconsistency of data being produced across different agencies. The data is very hard to access. There is, I really like your term, ministerial sovereignty. Like, this is my data, as you pointed out. You can't access it. I expended resources and energy to produce this. This is mine. And then they are produced in formats that are hard to use. like Sri Lanka, we do have laws on freedom of information, so you can access that. But then for the longest while, what you would be given is either a book or a printout or a PDF file, which is quite hard to analyze. And PDF, okay, you can convert it, but if it's a PDF scanned document, then that provides an increasing level of difficulty. So the government of Indonesia then drafted out a presidential decree, and the underlying push behind it is to make it easier to assure the quality of data, to integrate and share and use data sets among governance agencies. So instead of going straight for the data quality itself or resolving disputes, I think what's quite interesting about the Indonesian government initiative is that it targets data governance, the rules and regulations that allow agencies to share and exchange data in the first place. So some technical aspects of that is mandating that each and every data set produced by government agencies should comply with one official standard for data production. Another technical aspect is requiring that the data produced come with metadata to show what is the rationale and the methodology behind producing that data. And a third technical aspect is requiring common standards of interoperability, which means that data produced by one system in one ministry can be read and exchanged with a system in another ministry. So those three things then propel the way forward for the governance. And what then the Indonesian government did is hold what we call socialization sessions. So they went around and asked public opinion, like, what do you think of this? And the public response was quite good. And I think this is also some of the work that people like Open Data Lab in Jakarta are doing, that HIVOS, Transparency International, Indonesia Corruption Watch. So all of these civil society organizations that are part of moving and pushing society towards accountability and transparency, they were part of the discussion as well. I think the Satu Data Indonesia represents a foundational push towards making data produced by government freely available for public use. On user-centered design principles, I'd actually like to cover two aspects. The first one is on the user, on the side of the government, on the side of the data producers. So I think the question is, often the model of data production is quite extractive. Somebody produces at the local level, somebody takes it up, and it gets analyzed. In Indonesia, we call it central, pusat, central government. So people don't make sense of the data at the level that they're being collected, and they're doing this because they have to. So the part that we did for the president's office was that they came to us and said, we have this draft regulation, we want it to be rolled out in the entire country. Can you develop a toolkit? Our question was, do they need a toolkit? What's the level of data literacy? What's the level of proficiency in working with data? So we worked with Open Data Lab in Indonesia, where they looked at the data journey, how data is generated, where it goes, how it flows, who uses it, and we looked at the emotional journey of people handling that data. And we actually found several things. Let me just check my notes. So some of the challenges that we encountered at that level was that, firstly, the data stewards, the people that are collecting and producing the data, that's not even a fifth of their responsibility. They are often people like midwives, whose job is to take care of pregnant moms. Or they are worn-out civil servants in the civil registry office. And then they also, on top of everything else that they have to do, they have to collect, verify, produce, and send the data. The other part, as Mr. Deshapriya highlighted, was the lack of coordination relating to governance procedures amongst government agencies, even those in the same line ministry, in the same lineage, or even in the same district across different sectors. And the third thing is the skills and knowledge needed to manage and interact with digital data are, to be frank, lacking. But these identify some of the opportunity areas, which includes clarifying organizational and coordination structure, clarifying data flows, and data formats. So what we did was, instead of having like shiny web platform prototypes and where people click, and it looks nice, but maybe they get excited and then for 2 weeks and then don't use it, we decided to go back to old school worksheets. And we created these prototypes and tested it out. Does this help you? Is this useful? For the data quality flow, the answer is like, yes, thank you, this is really useful. What's surprising for us is that for 2 of them, the answer is like, this is cute, but it's not useful, but thank you, it's really nice. So we probed deeper and asked, why is it not useful? And I think as designers, we have to really let go of the ego, and when somebody tells you it's not useful, you need to believe them. So they said, well, firstly, for the data format, this is too simple. We deal with pretty complex data, and often you're collecting different things, and you're using different terms, and there's no comprehensive dictionary that we can go to. So for us, that's like, okay, this is way beyond our capacity to deal with this problem. Indonesian government, I think you need to take this on. The second one was, for the data coordination toolkit, why is this not useful? Of course it's useful, ma'am, to identify how I should coordinate with this person and this person, but if the mayor or the head of district doesn't put it in my terms of reference, then how am I supposed to account for my time if I do this? What authority do I have in engaging these other stakeholders? I can't make them do this. They're on the same level. So then we learned a valuable lesson about how the politics of data governance works. So the final product that we submitted back to the President's office contained the data flow tool for data quality, but also we ended up developing a tool for the mayors and the district leads so that they can then form a local regulation. So it's basically, if you want a local regulation for data governance in your district, these are the things that you need to consider. And another thing that we ended up making was that the feedback was the most useful thing out of the process was the process. So then from that, we developed a tool for facilitating these discussions at the local level.
Okay. I'm conscious, Dias, that you have, earlier we heard about this thing about triangulating data and how different data can be brought together. Maybe you can just touch on that very briefly, because I'm conscious of the time, and I'm also conscious that there is an example of how something happening in Indonesia has also happened in Sri Lanka. Maybe if you could shed some light on that.
Okay. Can I have the slide deck, please? So in my previous session, I mentioned something about a system called Vampire, and this triangulates between satellite imagery, census data, and food security surveys. We did this in collaboration with the World Food Programme, and the World Food Programme connected with their counterparts here in Sri Lanka. And I think this is a good example of what your data can do. So in Sri Lanka, I think WFP here coordinated with the Ministry of Disaster Management. We looked at rainfall anomaly. And rainfall anomaly is basically like at a particular day or week or month, how far is it from the average? And I know it's very small here, but you can see the bluer areas are where it's almost 200% more than what is usual. And we also used Sri Lanka's disaster data to look at historically what kind of disasters are there. So we have this layer, and then another layer is population. So darker blue is where the population is most dense. We also can replace that layer with another one, and again, this is statistical data on the highest concentration of people in poverty. What this does is then we have a layered interaction between people who are impacted by increased rainfall, significantly increased rainfall, and are poor. So if we take, for instance, a particular area that is red and impacted by rainfalls in northern Jaffna, we can then drill down on that and look at historical data on disasters and see that sometime in January, was it 2015? I can't see the data, I'm sorry. In that particular time, a disaster happened and this was the impact. The larger the blue circle, the larger the impact.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that. There is an overwhelmingly, unfortunately, the entire question is not coming on my screen, but it is, maybe Mr. Deshapriya, I'll ask, put this question to you. It's in light of Cambridge Analytica. So recently there's been this scandal. I think it's important that the public is aware of how the government or research agencies obtain mobile and internet data. It says, can you elaborate on the ... And unfortunately, it's not something I can read further, but maybe, are there particular, can you elaborate on the legal arrangements? I'm not sure if you are aware of the legal arrangements of how such information is disseminated. Is there any comment that you can provide on this?
Thank you. And this is, though we are called telecommunication and it is also Ministry of Telecommunication, aspects is mostly handled by the Telecom Regulation Commission. But coming to the law, number one, that in Sri Lanka we don't have a strong privacy law, and number two, we don't have data protection law. So, however, there are enough areas covered by some other laws, but based on that, how the communication data, especially mobile users' data, is being shared is basically it has to be anonymized in the sense that name and the mobile number or any particular information that that you could link data into a person to be removed before sharing. So it is not public data. It is on mutual arrangements that basically if you get data from a particular service provider, that they would have bilateral benefits and so on. That is on such arrangement that they share data. However, current law is enough to prevent sharing personal information when that such data is being made available to a third party.
Okay, wonderful. There's another question, and this maybe I'll ask you, Mr. Deshapriya, not only with your hat as in your current role, but given your vast experience across the state service, the question is, how do we avoid misinterpretation of data which leads to big issues in the country? Now, from the perspective of bureaucracy, how do we tackle an issue like that?
Can I, is it basically something like, what happened in the social media, or is it?
Possibly even, I know, let's say, even when we're analyzing election results,
Yes.
when I look across the newspapers across languages, it's evident that the election results are being interpreted in a particular way, which is not necessarily very stringent, it's sometimes through a misinterpretation of data. Where do we have to start sort of addressing those issues? And that's not only a Sri Lankan issue, that's a global issue.
Yes, government data is something and interpretation is something completely different. Now, if you look at coming to this particular election issue, the responsibility is only to issue the results at a certain level, but interpretation could go in different ways. So likewise, that is, I think, rather than we try to restrict the interpretation ability, I think, we should, in my opinion, we should encourage. Now, when you look at the government data, we are right now, with ICTA carried out a survey on ICT usage in household and by citizens. Looking at that, it is complete, you can interpret such data completely contradicting what is being published by the Census and Statistics Department. So, because the data is available at a very high granular level. In that sense, I think we need to encourage interpretation. However, data correlation and coordination should be facilitated by the government, as she mentioned. Without such correlation facility, I think data would be meaningless. And I am fully for giving the maximum flexibility to the people who would analyze it. Mm-hmm. However, at the point of release, there has to be a very decisive requirement by government to ensure that wrong data which would harm citizens would not get into third parties.
Sure. I'm conscious of time, so maybe as a final question, so Mr. Deshapriya, I noticed is someone who has a Twitter account, and I took a little scroll through your tweets from the past, and one interesting tweet that I found was you highlighting a UN e-government development index, which showed that Sri Lanka was ranked 74th in the world in the 2014 report. When I looked at it, when I went and accessed the 2016 report, I realized that Sri Lanka has moved from 74th to 79th in the world. So in light of, and I know that there are a variety of reasons for why we may have dropped down a few ranks, but do you feel that we should be enthusiastic about e-government in Sri Lanka? This idea of proactive disclosure of information, do you feel like we're actually equipped in that way? I can see a question here which also says that policy moves a lot faster than practice. So how do we ensure that policy can keep up to date with the different technologies that exist? What's your general thought for the country looking forward?
You asked
I know, many things.
Okay, I will take the easiest one. Yeah. So one thing is that Sri Lanka are not moving forward, but not fast enough. That's why we are slipping down the index, and everybody else is on the fast lane. Secondly, the policy and the technology, I think, again, something we have to be very conscious of, whether our public policies are matching, are good enough for the current time, especially where, digital transformation, digital identity, digital payments, shared economy, shared platforms, those things are completely changing the landscape. And so while in a moving picture, we try to be a stationary object. So the public policy. So I think by taking cue from Singapore has a great organization called Lee Kuan Yew Public Policy School. So that is where public policy is to be amended fast enough on the fly to meet the requirements, to adapt to the current needs of the technology. So I think we are conscious of that, but government has to move very fast to be in line. Otherwise, we will be left we won't be able to catch up. So this is a very critical point. Doing public policy to keep up the pace of technology.
Okay, and so then, in a word, is our trajectory upward trajectory? Are we plateauing, or is it a downward trajectory?
You mean e-government index?
Or generally, when it comes to the vision for open data?
Open data, I think, I'm taking personal interest. So we did back in 2012 with great enthusiasm. Now it has been quite left out. And this platform, when I met organizers also, I think, this gave us a new strength, new power to move forward and ensure that before June we would be having more than 500, and by end of the year we need to have at least 1,000 data sets. So we are on the going up. In the curve, we are going up.
Wonderful. Well, I'm conscious that our time is up, but thank you very much for those of you all who have asked questions. Thank you very much to our two esteemed panelists. I think it's clear that there is food for thought when we're looking at open data. As Mr. Deshapriya highlighted, is it the new oil? Will we have a little bit more success than we've had in the Mannar Basin? These are question marks. Stemming from what Diaz mentioned, will we start looking at the need for common open data standards, the interoperability of the data to ensure that different state agencies can actually use the data that's produced from their counterparts? These are all areas which are fruitful, and wishing you all a very productive late afternoon session. Thank you.